Have you ever wondered how to balance your spiritual life and your physical obligations? Have you ever wondered why it's important to stay connected with God and how that can actually help you in your life? What should you be keeping in mind while you're achieving your goals in life? And can you, as one person, really make a difference? These are the topics we're going to be covering as we dive into today's video on the subject, on the story of Nehemiah. This is one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, and Nehemiah was just an ordinary man who went on to change the world and to change history. Welcome to my channel. Here in this space, we're breaking down the supernatural truths in the Bible in simple ways to elevate your daily life and give you more joy, acceptance, and empowerment and connection to God. So who was Nehemiah? Nehemiah was just an ordinary man who was serving as a king's cupbearer in Persia. Nehemiah had heard about the difficulties that was going on in Jerusalem. Walls had been burnt down, the people were being put into slavery, everything was amok, and his heart was torn for these people. But he didn't just jump up and go into action, and he also didn't just dismiss it, stating that he wasn't important. So what did he do about it? Well, first, it actually states in Nehemiah 1 verses 4 that he sat down and wept, and for days he mourned, fasted, and prayed to God. Only after he developed this real intimate connection and relationship with God, simply for the sake of relationship, did he actually then ask for what he was about to ask for, asking for assistance and guidance on what he was supposed to do. After this, he exercised patience. We note in the beginning of Nehemiah 1 that it was late autumn when he first heard about what was happening, and it actually didn't arise for him to be able to take inspired action until the following spring. So remember, no matter what you're doing in life, no matter what God has put on your heart, how can you exercise patience while staying connected to God the whole time? He didn't give up praying to God this whole time, and he still always stayed connected. So once this opportunity arose, where the king was actually asking him what was wrong, that he seemed really sad and troubled, we see him offer up a quick prayer to God before even replying to the king. We notice this in Nehemiah 2 verses 4, where the king asked, "Well, how can I help you?" And with a prayer to the God of heaven, I replied, "If it please the king, and if you are pleased with me, your servant, send me to Judah to rebuild the city where my ancestors are buried." He clearly had no skills or talents in any of this. And we also see just before that, in verse 2, that he was terrified. But he still went ahead with the mission that God put on his heart, and he recognized this for the opportunity that it was. In this, he also wasn't afraid to ask the king for what he needed to ensure that he was actually able to follow through on this plan that God put on his heart. And we see him asking the king for letters to safely travel to Persia, or safely travel from Persia to Israel. And we also even see him asking for timber. He didn't just put it out to God, provide me what I need, and then expected it to magically show up. He was willing to speak his truth and to speak up and to ask for assistance. So if you are going through a troubling situation, how can you not only stay connected to God, but have the courage to speak up and ask for assistance in this? Once he got to Israel, what happens? We actually see him laying out a very careful strategic plan where before talking to the leaders of Israel, he went and pretty much did a survey to figure out what the work actually had to be done. Again, we see him taking very deliberate, thoughtful, precise, planned, physical action to match his faith, his connection, and his trust in God. He has a plan in place. He's got a strategy. He's connected to God. He has assistance. But what's next? Well, adversity. We all know that when we start tackling something, things happen to come up. We tend to get really busy in life. We might get sick. People might ask us, what are we doing and why are we doing it? And we can often get discouraged. But Nehemiah didn't let that stop him. And we see that there was a lot of discouragement. Even just when talking to the leaders of Israel, telling them his plans, in 2 verses 19, they actually scoffed contemptuously at him. And he simply replied in verse 20, the God of heaven will help us succeed. We, his servants, will start rebuilding the wall. He always gave credit to God, and he wasn't afraid to speak up and to silence the naysayers. This adversity even gets worse, and we see this in chapter 4, where there are other tribes outside of Jerusalem, and we see in Nehemiah 4 verse 7 and 8 that they heard the wall was being repaired and they were furious, and they all made plans to come and fight against Jerusalem and throw us into confusion. But we prayed to our God and guarded the city day and night to protect ourselves. So not only did they pray to God, but they set a plan in place again to protect themselves. They placed armed guards. They made sure that they always had their weapons with them. It even states that in 4 verses 17, the laborers carried on their work with one hand supporting their load and one hand holding a weapon. All the builders had a sword belted to their side, and the trumpeters stayed with me to sound the alarm. There was a lot of very deliberate, precise action that went in place to fulfill this building of the wall. And even when it came to building the wall, these people weren't soldiers. These people weren't builders. They were priests. They were merchants. There was goldsmiths, people who didn't necessarily have any technical ability in how to go about this. But they made sure there was a plan, and they put their full effort into it, and they worked tirelessly at it while staying connected to God for strength and for wisdom on how to continuously shift and move as plans changed and as things came up. After all of this, they they built the wall, they didn't listen to the enemies, and they were able to come together as a people, and they were able to come back to God. There's a lot of these people who thought God had forsaken them. So we recognize that in chapters 7, 8, and 9, a lot of these people didn't even know what the law of God was at the time. At that time, Christ hadn't come and died for their sins yet, and there was very specific laws that they had to follow in order to stay close and stay connected with God. And a lot of these people didn't even know what these laws were. So after Jerusalem was built, in order to ensure that this death and destruction didn't happen again, they made sure to stay connected with God, to fast, to pray, and to read over these laws so they could know how to best continue their life, so that way they didn't fall back into their old ways. So how can you equip yourself with knowledge and with wisdom, with new practices and new habits to sustain this new life that you have built after you have done all of this work of setting this new life in place? We also even see that, going back to Nehemiah 6, verse 15 and 16, that through this, when our enemies in the surrounding nations heard that the wall was finished, they were frightened and humiliated, and they realized this work had been done with the help of our God. So one additional thing is that this isn't even just for you. This isn't even just for other believers or other people who are working directly with you on your path. When you're taking inspired, aligned action with God, who else can you waken up to the possibility of God and how maybe they can even change their lives through recognizing how God has worked through you? So after all of this, after you have completed your inspired action, you've seen everything follow through and come to fruition, what then? Celebrate it. Celebrate God. Acknowledge Him. Acknowledge your power within you for having accomplished this phase of your life, and thank God for guiding you through that. We see here Nehemiah 8 verses 9. Don't mourn or weep on such a day as this, for today is a sacred day before the Lord your God. For the people had all been weeping as they listened to the words of the law. They had seen how much they had fallen away, how much they weren't listening to God, how much they weren't respecting God. And so they were really sad. But Nehemiah told them to go and celebrate with a feast of rich foods and sweet drinks and share gifts of food. This is a sacred day. Don't be dejected and sad, for the joy of the Lord is your strength. We can get so caught up in the past and what we didn't do, or where we could have been if we had done better in the past. But the past is the past, and we are here now for a reason, and we have so much renewed strength and wisdom and compassion and love because of what we have gone through. So celebrate what you have gone through. Toast to that. Cheers to God to that. Thank God for all of that. And live with joy and gratitude. Life is too short to not live in gratitude. Life is too short to live in fear. But when you notice that fear, allow that fear to draw you closer to God, and allow that fear to help you come up with a strategy to see things in ways you might not have seen before, so that you can move forward in peace and love. So in summary, how can we take inspired action? 1, by forming a relationship with God, simply for the sake of having a relationship with Him, because He has a higher perspective than us. He has divine plans for you. He has so much love for you and wants to help you get through this life. Don't forget to pray every day, in every situation, whenever times of trouble come up. Let prayer be your first action. Pray with praise, forgiveness, and honesty. 3, take flexible, strategic action, trusting in God. Don't be so set in your ways that you aren't seeing the obstacles that are coming up, but be aware of those obstacles and put plans in place so you can stay on your path. And finally, celebrate God and your victory. Don't be so caught up in the past that you don't recognize and appreciate what you have in the moment and what you will be having more of in the future through this aligned action. You can make a difference. It doesn't matter what you have done before. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you're doing now. You can make a difference. You can change the world. But it starts with aligned, divine action. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you check out some of my other videos. I have some really exciting things coming up, including diving into what does God really think about oracle cards, what does God think about smudging, and other really fun Bible stories to share with you guys. So make sure you hit that subscribe button, like, share, follow, and I look forward to connecting with you further. Much love.